Hi, I'm Sarah Tantillo. I'm the Managing Director of Humanities at the Great Oaks Legacy Charter School Network. I'm going to be presenting right now on the 4 key critical reading skills. I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay. Let's play from current slide. Wait for the start. Here we go. Okay, great. All righty, let's get started. So our main objective here is to review the 4 key critical reading skills and practice them a little bit in order to improve literacy instruction. Along the way, you might find that there may be a 5th critical reading skill, so stay tuned for that. A couple things you might want to know about if you don't already know. I have this website and this blog. The work here today is based on the work that I'm doing through these different domains and these books. If you haven't already seen it, you should review my module on the comprehension process, which walks you through this process of how we climb the comprehension process staircase, starting with our prior knowledge, paraphrasing, asking questions, drawing inferences, reading more text, and so on and so on. I'm going to move forward from there to talk about the 4 key critical reading skills. So here we are, paraphrasing, inference, vocab and context, summarizing or inferring main idea. We're going to start out with paraphrasing, and there we go. Okay, so if you think back to the comprehension process staircase, I started out with a sentence, the man fell down, and I paraphrased it, put it in my own words to he collapsed. Just want to re-emphasize that paraphrasing, when you paraphrase, you should use stronger vocabulary. It's not dumbing down. It's using stronger vocabulary, your own words, which are hopefully stronger. Okay. And paraphrasing entails several different things. So first thing is you need to unpack the vocabulary, right? Second thing is you need to unpack the syntax and grammar. A couple different things you want to consider here when you're doing it. To illustrate this point, I have 2 letters for you. They're both written with exactly the same words, and I'm going to read both of them, and I want you to see what you notice that's different between the 2 letters. So here's the first letter. Dear Jack, I want a man who knows what love is all about. You are generous, kind, thoughtful. People who are not like you admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me for other men. I yearn for you. I have no feelings whatsoever when we're apart. I can be forever happy. Will you let me be yours? Jill. Okay, that's letter 1. Now here's letter 2. Dear Jack, I want a man who knows what love is. All about you are generous, kind, thoughtful people who are not like you. Admit to being useless and inferior. You have ruined me. For other men, I yearn. For you, I have no feelings whatsoever. When we're apart, I can be forever happy. Will you let me be? Yours, Jill. So take a moment. Let me go back to letter 1. And now letter 2. And think about what you noticed. So you probably noticed that the punctuation is different, and that punctuation affects the meaning of these 2 letters. So I'm not saying that I would necessarily use this with elementary school students, but students of a certain age might appreciate seeing these 2 letters side by side, and you could make the point that, you might start out writing a love letter to somebody, and by virtue of your punctuation, accidentally break up with that person. So be careful. Punctuation matters. In elementary school, we tend to see something a little bit more like this. I'm not going to read this to you because I don't have the lung capacity, but you get the idea. All right, and this is a good one to try to get students to read as punctuated so that they get the point. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about syntax and grammar is the idea of treating students like detectives. So instead of telling them the definition of a pronoun, show them two sets of sentences and ask them to infer things about these sentences and start to figure out how pronouns work. So if you compare column A, sentence 1 to column B, sentence 1, you can see that him is replacing John, etc. For more information about using grammar to improve writing, check out my book on that topic, and also I have a website page with the same name. Okay, now when you think about paraphrasing, sometimes we'll say to the students, okay, can you paraphrase that? They tend to struggle because they don't know what to keep and what to change. So I have a simple strategy for this where you can explicitly teach students how to paraphrase. It's 2 steps. First step is you want to bubble wrap the things that you want to keep. So if you think about when you move, you bubble wrap your valuable items to protect them. So we want to bubble wrap or circle. So again, I do this gesture so students remember it. First step, circle things you want to keep. So if you're reading through a sentence and you see names, proper nouns, numbers, statistics, or any words you can't think of another word for, whether it's a really specific word or it's a word like the or in or of that you don't want to change, just circle it. And then the second step is to just underline and change everything else. That's it. So I'm going to show you a few examples of this. So I started out with the sentence, people in Chicago work in many places. I underlined people because I could think of another word for it. In Chicago, I bracketed because in is just one of those words that I don't need another word for. And Chicago is a proper noun. It's a name of a place. And then I underlined work because I could think of another word for it. In, again, bracketed because, and then many places. And so you'll see the sentence I came up with. And again, notice that I'm using strong vocabulary. I'm not simplifying. In this case, when you're practicing with students, it's good to start out with simple sentences and let them see that paraphrasing can and should be used in this way. Put things in your own words using your own strong vocabulary. Let's look at another example. This one is from a sentence in the New York Times, so it's a little bit more elevated. And you can see what I did here as I worked through this example. If you want to, you should pause the video right now and just read these two sections carefully. I'm going to keep moving. Here's another example. This one is the original text. If you want to pause the tape and see what you come up with, in the next slide, I'm going to get to how I worked through it. And then in the third slide, I will show you my final product. So press pause if you want to try it yourself. Okay, so here's what I came up with. What I bracketed, 2 days being like a number, and so on. And then again, you'll see what I converted this to on this slide. All right. There are practice handouts available on my website, The Literacy Cookbook, on the Comprehension 101 page. So let's go back to the comprehension process staircase for a moment. We just worked on the first step, which is paraphrasing. You have prior knowledge, vocabulary, knowledge of syntax and grammar, and you're able to put the sentence or the words in your own words. The next thing you want to do is ask questions. And this is where I would argue this could be a 5th critical reading skill if you want to label it as such, asking and answering questions. In fact, asking and answering 5 W's and H questions is a 2nd grade standard. And if you are working with any students right now who cannot ask and answer the 5 W's and H questions, you should press pause and teach them how to do that. Because if they can't, they will not get above the paraphrasing step. If you can't ask why or how questions, you cannot infer. It just is that simple. And so students struggle to infer, and they struggle to write explanations because you need to be able to ask and answer why and how questions in order to infer and explain. I have a handout called the 5 W's and H Organizer, also on my website. So let's look at what inference entails. The example that I used with the staircase, the man fell down was my original sentence. I asked why, and then I inferred maybe he was sick using my prior knowledge that healthy people don't just suddenly fall down. Okay, so related to inference is this notion of annotation. If you are paying close attention to the text, if you're questioning the text relentlessly, right? Again, if you go back to that staircase, you see that we're asking questions, drawing inferences, reading more text, paraphrasing, and asking more questions. We're relentlessly questioning the text. So annotating, when you're marking up the text, you should be really questioning the text on some level. And depending on your purpose for annotation, that will determine what kinds of questions you're trying to answer. And so I use this slide as a way to remember that it's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and the question in your head might be, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? And so you look around, you look at the produce, maybe you squeeze some things to see if they're ripe. And you're asking a lot of questions because you are coming in with a pretty open-ended question. What am I going to eat for dinner tonight? If you have a more specific question like, hey, can I get the ingredients for guacamole? You go very specifically to the section of the store where the avocados are and perhaps a few other ingredients. Similarly, if you just are coming in for bread and milk, you just go in, get what you need, and you come out quickly. So how you annotate really does determine, is determined by your purpose, right? So we don't always annotate the same way. I wanted to dwell on this for a moment because I think it's really important for our students to understand the value of annotation and how it helps them process the text and really comprehend it deeply. Okay, so when you're working on an inference, here are some different names of some different tools that you can use. QIEE Organizer stands for question, infer, evidence, and explanation. It's a simple 3-column chart. You ask a question, you try to draw an inference, and then you support that inference with evidence and explanation. There's a what's important organizer that gets at that issue of how can you tell what's important in this text. And if you think about it, strong readers have a lot of experience with determining what's important, but we sort of have a kind of a heuristic in our head that we use to determine what's important. So if you're reading a narrative, for example, you might think about major decisions that the characters make, problems that they try to solve, lessons that they learn, patterns that you see emerging in the text, and any kind of cause and effect things happening. So the what's important organizer walks students through that process. The DDAT idea is when you're analyzing characters, you're looking for direct description or indirect description through dialogue, actions, and thoughts. And then I have another more detailed character analysis organizer. All these tools and a bunch of others can be found on my website on the Analyzing Literature page. Now let's get to the third, or maybe fourth, critical reading skill, vocabulary in context. And I underlined in context purposefully because when we're talking about this as a test item, we have to really make sure students are really clear that it's not a vocabulary question, it's really an in context question. And so here's a good example of that. When you read this sentence, you see the word diverted. Now, if you're a student who's well-read and you're going to answer this multiple choice question, you may know that the word diverted means amused. And so when you look at the answer choices and you don't go back to the text, you pick A and you keep rushing and you get it wrong. Because in this context, diverted does not mean amused, right? Take a look. They're not interested in being diverted from their direction with alternative routes. Okay, in this case, D would be the correct answer. Whenever, incidentally, if you're trying to make up multiple choice questions for vocab and context as an exercise, keep in mind that you should always have at least one distractor that is a different definition of the same word, and the context determines what the correct answer is. Good test makers do that. Okay, let's keep going. Finally, we're looking at the fourth or fifth key critical reading skill, finding main idea or argument. And for starters, I would cross off the word finding and put the word inferring in there, because it's not a Where's Waldo exercise. In fact, as I mentioned in my comprehension process module, you are trying to infer main idea by accumulating all the inferences that you gleaned throughout the text as you were reading. So it's not just point to it. That being said, if you're reading a well-written nonfiction passage, there should be a thesis statement to look for, and there should be topic sentences, which are arguments for the paragraphs that you could look for. But it's an inference approach that you need to take. And certainly if you're reading a narrative, you have to infer the theme. Okay, so we talk about summarizing and work on that skill. Here are a variety of different tools that you can use. I mentioned previously the 5 W's in H organizer. So if you were trying to write a summary, you want to answer who, what, when, where, why, and how. If you have an entire passage and you want to summarize it, you can convert it to 1 to 2 sentences. Or you can take a long sentence and make it shorter. Or you can take a whole passage and give it a new title. And again, you can use the What's Important organizer that supports summarizing narratives. Here's an example of summarizing practice where you take a long sentence and try to shrink it down. If you want to take a moment right now, press pause and see if you can shrink this down into 10 words or fewer. I can do it in 3. Okay, if you tried it, my 3-word answer is liberty trumps safety. Moving on. Okay, here's a testing tip related to summarizing and main idea questions. The main idea is never a fact. The main idea is an argument. And the reason for this is that facts are details that support the main argument. Let's take a look at an example question. Now, you haven't read the passage, but if you work through this with that one tip in mind, you probably could get this question right. Now, I wouldn't suggest that students only use that strategy, but let's walk through it just so you see the idea. All right, so if we read the first sentence, we can rule it out because that's just a straight up fact. We read B, running alongside the bulls, has become exciting and dangerous. Seems kind of argumentative, so let's leave it alone for now. C, the bravest runners, seems kind of argumentative, so let's leave it alone. And then D is another fact. So right now, we've eliminated A and D, and we're down to B and C as potential answer choices. How did I know that B and C were potential answer choices? I was looking for argumentative or debatable words. And in B, I noticed exciting and dangerous. And in C, I noticed bravest. It's one way that you can tell that something's an argument or not. I have more information about determining arguments versus evidence on my website and in a few other places. I'm probably going to develop another module around that as well. In any case, now we're down to B and C, and our question is, what could somebody plausibly write a whole essay about, either B or C? And when it comes down to that, C is just too specific. So we know the correct answer is B. All right, moving on. Again, if you want more evidence, more information on argument versus evidence, you're going to receive this PowerPoint as well. Just click on the link and it will take you right to that page. Take a moment right now and jot down your key takeaways. Thank you so much.